everybody, and good afternoon. My name is Rocio Herzog. I'm a freshman here at Carroll Morgan. It is my honor this morning to be presented Mr. John Liu. He's the Director of the Environmental Education Media Projects, an award-winning filmmaker, and he's here to speak to us about the cultural narrative, how technology and media does not always affect history in the best way. A cultural narrative is about leaving a positive handprint on history. Mr. Liu has worked many years in media. He devoted 10 years working with CBS News. And he's here to share with us his experience on working in media and what we can learn from it. Because many times media puts out information that may change our opinions or on what we think, because media has a great influence on these days on the way we live. He's here to inspire us to take a step forward to a positive mindset. He will discuss on how together we can not just study history, but how we can make it happen.
Chairs over here, chairs over there, pull them in a little bit.
And now I will hand it over to Mr. Liu to elaborate on this topic. Thank you.
Can you drag these two chairs or these three around? So, everybody's young. I'm going to try to maintain my enthusiasm. So, if you want to reach me, my email is there, johnliu@emp.org. That depends on whether you're interested. I was at a conference, and oh my, now we have no chairs. Sit on tables in the back. More tables and chairs here. Come on in. Now that we've discovered where we are, Linda. Linda did. Hold on. Come on, people. Hurry up. We're not going to have time. Complex issue. Sit on tables. I like the table sitters. Wise and their ears. Okay, so we have a dominant cultural narrative. Now, this is, some of you, I think, may be very happy individuals. I was on the bus with some young people from the airport, and they were all laughing and singing. I don't know if it was you guys, but that's wonderful. But if you turn on the TV, you're very likely to see somebody murdering somebody else. Or you're likely to see zombies, the Walking Dead, are coming for you. It's very popular. They're everywhere. What is that? That's a vision of what the future may be. And there are some interesting things. I was just at a school where they were reading Hamlet. Have you read Hamlet? It may be a bit challenging, but if you get a chance, I highly recommend that you read Hamlet. He sort of descends into insanity. Another good read is Homer. Anybody read Homer? Okay. Homer is quite interesting. He's also, so there are things which are profound truths. So Homer was really thousands of years ago writing, and yet his writing is vital. Shakespeare was writing quite a long time ago. Does anybody know exactly when Shakespeare was writing? Let me see, the Globe. I'm sure we could find out by Googling it. But anyway, several hundred years. Another great book is Candide by Voltaire. If you get a chance, read Candide by Voltaire. I think and especially appropriate for your age group would be Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Highly recommended at this moment. Don't wait too long. Better read it now. And but Candide by Voltaire is absolutely hilarious. Anyway, we have dominant cultural narratives. They're things which people sort of believe. You're socialized to believe this. The American dream. I heard somebody say recently, the United States is the richest country in the world, and the United States is the strongest country in the world. These are very dangerous kinds of statements. Obviously, that person had never been to Norway, because in Norway they have so much money because they very prudently invested their oil revenue in a trust fund, that they're all just magnificently rich, but they don't act that way. They don't overspend. They didn't change their lifestyle when they started to get huge amounts of oil money. So that's a very interesting thing. Anyway, these dominant narratives are fleeting. Time is passing. Age is not a number, whoever said that. Time is passing, and we have a few decades of life on Earth. And there are many things. I recommend that you look into all of these things. Francis Fukuyama has made a thing called The End of Civilization after the collapse of the Cold War. Relatively interesting. I completely disagree with his outcomes. Ancient Rome, ancient China, the whole period of divine right in Europe, these are all very interesting. These are the dominant cultural narratives often, and they're hubris. This is what Homer was talking about. He's talking about man's arrogance. And I say man's arrogance because we used to talk about human beings as mankind, but actually it should be human beings. So I think women can exhibit hubris as well, which is sad because hubris is not a good thing. And there's some subtexts in our existing narrative. So and these subtexts are really negative. So materialism, what is the meaning of life? Do people, when I was a kid, I was really annoying. I used to ask people, like, what is the meaning of life? And they would tell me, be quiet. We don't talk about that. Because you're supposed to understand that intrinsically, or it's passed to you by your society, or your religion, or your family, or your school. Well, actually, I think we really badly need to talk about that. Because what we have now is a society which is terribly materialistic. And we have terribly unequal rights. So if you've read the Declaration of Independence, you know, stirring lines, wonderful lines, like, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, again men, are created equal. Well, that's beautiful. That's an absolutely beautiful statement. The man who wrote it was a huge slave owner. So it's also a very hypocritical statement. Why did he say it? Why did he write it down when he knew he couldn't live that? Thomas Jefferson. Let's look at Thomas Jefferson. I think he wrote these lines because he knew it was true, and that he wanted to be on the right side of history, because all human beings are equal. They're born naked, and they live for a few decades, and then we die, all of us. And everyone who's alive today is a representation of all life since the beginning of time. That's the message of DNA. So genetically, if you're alive today, or anyone else is alive today, then our ancestors experienced everything since the beginning of time. All of our ancestors were subsistence agriculturalists. All of our ancestors were hunters and gatherers. All of our ancestors changed as time went by. And the cultural narratives that we have developed are interesting, but we now have a vast array of problems. And this vast array of problems that we have is going to be your problem. I'm doing everything that I can, but I can promise you that you are going to have to take on this work, and that it's a life's work, because the next generations that come after you are going to depend on you as well. So we have a dominant cultural narrative. We have narrative subtext. Can you, everybody read this, right? Right. So you get the idea of all these things. I don't need to repeat it. And then the question that we need to ask, wait a moment. So I want to show you this. This is in Mali, in sub-Saharan Africa. So this is a quick look, and this is something which made me understand something.
I'm John D. Lee. I've been traveling throughout the world to learn about how ecosystems function, seeking a path to a sustainable future. On this trip, I've begun to study and document the inner Niger Delta in Mali. Although I've been many times to the continent, this is my first visit to this part of West Africa. I'm immediately struck by the compelling beauty of the people and the extreme ecological importance of the land. Traveling north from Mali's capital, Bamako, and following the Niger River, I find a complex ecological system with a very important role in regulating the Earth's hydrological cycle, weather patterns, and climate. There are patches of wetlands where rich plant diversity and bird life are evident. As we travel further north, I notice that the vegetation cover begins to thin. I'm told that much of the natural tree cover has been lost over centuries and millennia from burning wood for fuel and clearing the land for agriculture. This has caused a continuous loss of fertility and moisture, and has made the simple traditional agriculture practiced here a precarious livelihood. We begin to see patches of bare, exposed earth, the result of large-scale herding of domestic animals. The government, with international development assistance, has sought to regulate the river with several dams. The reasoning behind building the dams is to control flooding, to generate electricity, and to provide irrigation to increase agricultural productivity. Below the dams are rice paddies, banana and sugarcane fields. These benefits are fairly easy to quantify, and for some, seem compelling justification for building the dams. But many scientists have questioned these large engineering solutions because they massively alter the natural river system. The dams reflect the assumption that the productivity from agriculture is more valuable than the natural biological diversity or the ability to naturally regulate the complex interactions of the wetlands, the weather, and the climate. This is increasingly important because yet more dams are planned. As I begin to see the vital role that the Inner-Niger Delta plays, it becomes clear that the decisions made concerning more dams will not only affect the people of the region, but the whole of North Africa and the world. For someone interested in how Earth systems function, there is much to learn in Mali. Every year, a dramatic change comes to the Inner-Niger Delta. Each year in the rainy seasons, the waters flowing from the Ghanaian highlands steadily rise to flood the lowlands below. The level typically rises as high as 6 meters over a vast area. The people who live in the delta, by long habit, know approximately what to expect. They prepare themselves and put all their belongings onto boats to seasonally migrate to higher ground. The people depend on the floods arriving as expected to bring back the waters after the dry season, to nurture the thirsty plants, to provide habitat for fish, and to provide the rhythm as well as the source of their lives. The flooded delta is a fascinating and unique ecosystem. It takes me some time to realize what huge amounts of water are present. The delta is a nesting ground for precious, rare, migratory birds. Specially adapted plants like these Borgo grasses provide habitat for the fish that traditionally provided employment for many and fed the people. These flood forests are made up of a very special subspecies of the acacia tree, Acacia kyrti. These trees spend part of the year submerged and part of the year on dry land. During the flood season, these trees drink deeply, absorbing water that remains in the local system during the drier periods. Over generations, the relentless desire to extract something that can be converted to income has vastly reduced the area covered by these trees. As these specialized habitats have been lost, the hydrological function has decreased. Many people who have never been here may perhaps be forgiven for assuming that it is inevitable for ecosystems to be depleted. But those who study this know that there is little or no biophysical reason why this ecosystem must continue to degrade. In Mali, there is even evidence of trees of gigantic size. This suggests that natural vegetation was at one time enormously larger than today. I begin to wonder, would it be possible to restore this, and what this would mean for climate control? Actively restoring vegetation here would certainly improve the lives of the people by providing them with locally and globally important work. Restoration would improve hydrological retention in a fragile part of Africa, reducing the spread of the desert, helping to control extreme weather events, and reducing human impact on the climate by naturally sequestering carbon. Mali's population of just 14 million people live in an area of 1,200,000 square kilometers. This is less than the population of Los Angeles, living in an area almost twice the size of France. From traditional reckoning, Mali is one of the poorest countries on the earth, near the bottom of many of the United Nations Human Development Indicators. The degradation and the poverty in Mali seem to be the result of a failure to value the ecosystem function. To insist that fragile but important ecological zones have no value unless they produce goods and services bought and sold by the global economy is simply wrong. Given the risks of human-induced climate change, this is an enormous mistake.
Here on the Inner Niger Delta in Mali, it's possible to see the effects of valuing productivity over function. We fail to understand that the Earth's water, its unique species of life, and its climate are regulated from places just like this. When these systems are fully functional, everybody on Earth benefits. But if we fail to value these essential functions, the local people are forced to degrade them just to survive. What's the value of the Earth's water, or biodiversity, or climate regulation? How can we consign to poverty those of us whose task it is to protect these essential functions?
There is much to learn about how the Earth's ecosystems function in the Inner Niger Delta, and we have only begun to scratch the surface. But it is clear that the hydrological, weather, and climate regulatory functions alone in the Inner Niger Delta are not only extremely valuable, but are absolutely necessary for human survival. I'm looking forward to learning more on my next visit to Mali and seeing how efforts to expand understanding and restoration of this unique and important region are progressing.
Well, I learned here that the degradation is not an accident. It's happening because the global economy says that value comes from production and consumption of goods and services. And that these derivatives, like this lovely computer I have, is somehow more valuable than this natural system and the people who live there. And the fact is, within a few years, this computer is a piece of junk that will have to be very carefully disassembled and recycled, or it will put toxic substances into the water and into the soil. And it is impossible for it to be more valuable than this natural ecosystem. This natural ecosystem is probably one of the most valuable systems on the earth. I have never, and I've been to 80 countries around the world, I've never seen a system that had this type of hydrological process. So it floods up to 6 meters and then it recedes every year. That is an enormous hydrological pump, which is regulating the Earth's atmosphere, its weather, and its climate. So there's one other thing. I really would rather talk to you, but we don't have much time. I want to show you. Well, let me just say, in my thoughts, I think we need a new cultural narrative. We need to be able to say everybody is equal and mean it. We need to be able to go to work and know that our work is not hurting anybody else. We need to make sure that the future has zero pollution. Why do we have pollution? Who said pollution is acceptable? It's unacceptable. We shouldn't have these cancer rates. Everybody shouldn't be raising their hand to say they know somebody who has cancer. That's ridiculous. And we need to have peace on the earth. We've gone through generations and generations of people, and wars have been endemic, and the the inequality and the differences, but it's ridiculous. No one can win. It's impossible to win, especially with the weapon systems that we have now. It's not noble to fight. So let me just show you something. I want to show you what is possible to change the cultural narrative. This is one of the most astonishing things that I've seen in recent times.
Today we honour the Indigenous peoples of this land, the oldest continuing cultures in human history. We reflect on their past mistreatment. We reflect in particular on the mistreatment of those who were stolen generations, this blemished chapter in our national history. The time has now come for the nation to turn a new page. A new page in Australia's history by righting the wrongs of the past and so moving forward with confidence to the future. We apologise for the laws and policies of successive parliaments and governments that have inflicted profound grief, suffering and loss on these our fellow Australians. We apologise especially for the removal of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families, their communities and their country. For the pain, suffering and hurt of these stolen generations, their descendants and for their families left behind, we say sorry. To the mothers and the fathers, the brothers and the sisters, for the breaking up of families and communities, we say sorry. And for the indignity and degradation thus inflicted on a proud people and a proud culture, we say sorry. We, the Parliament of Australia, respectfully request that this apology be received in the spirit in which it is offered, as part of the healing of the nation. For the future, we take heart, resolving that this new page in the history of our great continent can now be written. We today take this first step by acknowledging the past and laying claim to a future that embraces all Australians. To the stolen generations, I say the following. As Prime Minister of Australia, I am sorry. On behalf of the Government of Australia, I am sorry. On behalf of the Parliament of Australia, I am sorry. And I offer you this apology without qualification. We apologise for the hurt, the pain and suffering we, the Parliament, have caused you by the laws that previous Parliaments have enacted. We apologise for the indignity, the degradation and the humiliation these laws embody. We offer this apology to the mothers, the fathers, the brothers, the sisters, the families and the communities whose lives were ripped apart by the actions of successive governments under successive parliaments. So let us turn this page together. Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, government and opposition, Commonwealth and state, and write this new chapter in our nation's story together.
So that would be an example of rewriting a cultural. We have about 10 minutes. Maybe we can have 15 because people got here later. Do you want to talk about anything? What do you think about cultural narratives? Anyone?
Mr. Rudd to, I mean, how did he arrive at that point?
Well, there's a group which is called Initiatives of Change, and they had been advocating for this for a long time. They come from a group which was originally called the Moral Rearmament, which was created after World War I. People who were just completely fed up with the murders that took place in World War I, trench warfare in France and so on. So many people repudiated that. If you want to find this, it's called Australians Sorry Day Apology to the Indigenous People, and it's on YouTube on the religious parliaments or something like that. So, go there. So I think, activists did it, and I think there was also a repulsion. I think, for instance, this is similar to the moment when slavery ended, and it didn't take place in one go. It took a long time, but humanity seems to have evolved to the point where it's no longer, it's understood that that's morally repulsive, it's criminal, it's immoral, it's wrong. So then it's repudiated by the whole society. So now you can't actually stand up and defend slavery in the world. So that's another example of a new cultural narrative. We need to do this. I noticed that the students have decided to make an action plan for climate change. Well, I've been working in this field for 20 years. And my immediate reaction was not like, oh good, now it's solved. I think you have to realize what's happening here. There is systemic dysfunction on a planetary scale. And in order to change this, you're going to have to change all the societies around the world. It's absolutely an incredible undertaking because we're using energy, we're destroying species, we're altering Earth systems. We're going to have another one of these discussions where I'm going to talk about the different Earth systems another day. So I can talk to you about microbiology and atmosphere and hydrology and all of the different biodiversity, all the things which are affecting and are affected by climate. So, in order to do this, you need a new cultural narrative. If you don't have a different cultural narrative, then the idea apparently in the dominant narrative is that to get rich is wonderful and that it's acceptable to have hundreds of millions and billions of poor people starving at the edges of degraded ecosystems. Well, there are several problems with that scenario. It won't work, first of all, because the people have equal rights. They're just, they have the same rights. All people have the same rights. They're just not getting them. So they're being denied their human rights. Well, that won't work because they will demand their human rights. And when you have 7 billion people and you're adding 1 billion people every 12 years, and billions of people demand their human rights, they're going to get it. So the question is, can we write a cultural narrative which is fair, which is evolutionary rather than revolutionary? Because if we don't, then we're going to have a serious problem. We already have a serious problem. So there's war in Syria. There is war in Ukraine, almost. There's unrest in Thailand. There's unrest. There's war in Palestine and Lebanon. There's war all over the place. So Venezuela is having people dying all the time now. So this is very, very serious. And there's some other things about this. We're at the end of the petroleum age. And if you don't understand that we're at the end of the petroleum age, then you better go back and study that too. Because in just 100 years, we have gone over the peak of production. Now what is not being told to you, because it looks like there's another 100 years. So we've gone over the peak, but there's another 100 years where we can exhaust this resource. But the fact is that we're altering the climate. You can't. We're over 400 parts per million of carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. This is outrageous. There is no fossil record that shows changes in this magnitude. We won't be able to survive. So that you have to come to grips with this. And that's sad because you're young. I wish you didn't have to come to grips with these things, but you do. So, we're at the end of the petroleum age. Why don't we embrace that? The new narrative shouldn't be, well, let's drain the last drop and wait and see what happens. The new narrative should be, hey, we have to use the energy that we have now to transition to a sustainable economy, and hey, by the way, let's make it fair. Let's make it so that everyone is equal on the earth. That's our task. Anybody else? Yeah.
So you started off talking about like media and the negative side of media, but I'm just curious, like with the direction that media is heading, like how fast it's changing and how worldwide it is now, like I've been looking into like how you can use the media to actually start these new cultural narratives. So I guess I'm just kind of curious, like how can we use the media that we have in a positive way because it's here?
Yeah.
It's like we have to use it in a positive way.
Well,
So how can we do that?
I'm not completely certain because we have gatekeepers who try to control the media. And I've had tremendous access. I've worked for all the major networks around the world. My films are broadcast on BBC and National Geographic and all over the world. So I've had tremendous access. And I feel like I don't have any access. So I've had tremendous access, but it's very difficult to something to do. But what's changing is that now actually if the commercial powers are not able to completely control the internet, then everyone can access the sum of human knowledge, first of all, which is going to massively change education for the better, I hope. And also, you can deliver materials. So the materials that we make, I think without the kind of when you're talking about soil and poor people, I'm not sure viral is exactly the word that I would say, but we have reached hundreds of thousands and millions of people. So we and that's both through the traditional media and through social media. So we are reaching large numbers of people, but only those people who choose to find us in the social media, because it's you have to want it in a way. But if you want it, you're in the right space because you're probably able to think about it. So I think it is wonderful that we have this capacity, and we need to use it. So more and more people need to participate in a profound discussion. I would say that the general tenor of the media, both in the traditional media and in the social media, is superficial. And so that's not going to work. So if you just want to play at something, you're not going to solve climate change. It's not going to happen. So if you want to get serious and you want to think about this, then you need to study microbiology, atmospheric science, hydrology, weather, botany, biodiversity, all of those things in order to really understand chemistry, biochemistry, plant physiology. It's wonderful. Taxonomy. Those are all fascinating. It's a great way to spend your time if you don't have anything else to do with study. is a really great thing. And the more you learn, the more valid or the more useful you are in addressing climate change. So at some point, when you understand these issues, you can speak with authority. When you speak with authority, then maybe political leaders or business leaders or people who are making decisions or public will listen. That's kind of what my experience is. Yes.
I'm not certain how to phrase this question, so I might ramble a little bit, but I'm thinking about the world's poor and how they're in survival mode. They're just trying to feed themselves, meet their own basic needs and the basic needs of their children. And how do you change the cultural narrative that within that population, given that they see the wealth and that's what they want? And so I'm thinking maybe like places where fracking might be happening. People are giving over their land just to meet their basic needs, and they're essentially being exploited by the current cultural narrative. And how do you sell a new narrative to someone who's like, wait a minute, I can't buy a new narrative, I just need to buy food?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And I would say the answer to it we have started to find. I don't have time to do this, but that we're making a film with a group called the Foundation for Ecological Security, and they're working with hundreds of millions of people in India who are landless. So what we've started to find is that hundreds of millions and billions of people around the world are these people that you're describing who are in survival mode. And what we're finding is they are the most valuable people on the earth. They just haven't been valued. That somebody in New York who pushes 3 buttons and makes $1 billion through robotic trading did not actually make anything. It's magic. And what those people do is work with the soil, work with plants, and what we need to do now in climate change is sequester carbon. So the people in cufflinks are unlikely to sequester any carbon whatsoever. They could write a check, they could make a policy and create an enabling environment in which this could take place, but it is the people who live on the earth in large degraded ecosystems who have the most important task in restoring the physical well-being of everyone and the planet. And it's doable. I think that's the one thing that we've seen, and you'll see it in my presentation tomorrow, is that it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems. So it's not a problem actually from a biophysical point of view. We know how to do it. We have to think, why are we stopping this? Why isn't this happening? Why did we degrade these places in the first place? That's where the cultural narrative is so important, to understand that it's not necessary. This happened because of human greed and human ignorance. So if we get over human greed and human ignorance, we can address this problem. But you're going to have to move very rapidly because we do not have any time left. So the scientific evidence is showing in this part of the world, temperature changes are happening at twice the speed of the rest of the world. And extreme and erratic weather events are doubling every decade. This is, from an evolutionary timescale, for the incidence of erratic and extreme weather to change every decade is like every tenths of a second. It's just happening. So you're going to have continuous extreme and erratic weather if that trend continues. So you have to make resilient landscapes. If you don't have resilient landscapes, if you think you can keep bringing food from all over the world, it's not going to happen. You're going to have to make food because at the end of the petroleum age, the sort of conversion of all these things, the end of the petroleum age, the impact of emissions on the atmosphere and the climate, they will have to change. And the enormous disparity between those who are wealthy and those who are poor. So we know what we have to do, it's just a really, really hard thing to do. Well, I think we're late now. I hear cheering.